Hi, this is Gina. Thank you for joining me for this Astrology Chat Live for March 4th, 2025. But really, the information we're going to discuss today will be relevant for the next couple of weeks. Today, I want to talk about how Mercury has entered this Venus retrograde conversation and give a few tips for harnessing this energy. So, you can see here that we have Venus retrograde in Aries, and Mercury has now entered that sign as well. And in 2 weeks, on March 15th, Mercury will station retrograde as well alongside Venus. They'll be retrograde in Aries and then in Pisces, and then they'll both station direct, moving back through Pisces and Aries again on their way out. So there's sort of different parts of this Venus retrograde cycle. Venus retrograde is much more rare than a Mercury retrograde. We have 3 or 4 Mercury retrogrades per year, and we only have a Venus retrograde about every year and a half. And Venus retrograde period is around about 40 days. This one is a little bit longer than that, and it's a particularly remarkable Venus retrograde. So I have several videos coming out and already out about this. I will link to a list of things to avoid doing during Venus retrograde at the end of this video. So before I go through these 5 tips for harnessing the energy, let's just take 2 to 3 minutes to go over Venus retrograde and Aries energy, and then add in that Mercury signature to that, because I think it's important to understand that. So Venus retrograde is a great time for reviewing relationships and relationship patterns, for thinking about finances and financial patterns. Things from the surface can come up to be healed or to be grappled with. For this reason, a Venus retrograde period can be a strengthening thing in relationships that are already strong, and it can weaken relationships that have problems, because what happens is those problems sort of come to the forefront to be dealt with. And if you are in a bond or a relationship with someone where working through a problem brings you closer, because that communication, that exchange, that vulnerability brings you more together, then that will strengthen that relationship. Or perhaps you don't really have that big of problems to bring up anyway. So Venus retrograde isn't an issue in a relationship that's already quite strong. But if there are a lot of difficulties in a relationship, and or if you in that relationship, the two of you have difficulty working through things, then it can cause some different challenges, right? But either way, Venus retrograde is sort of it's a relational process, and it is an emotional process. It's not really an intellectual or a cerebral one, except we have Mercury entering into it now, and that sort of brings things to a different level. But I think actually, before I talk about that, let's talk about how the signature of Aries is uniquely influencing this as well. Because here we are with a Venus retrograde, all about relationships, all about bringing different problems, negative patterns to the surface to be dealt with. And in some relationships, that is easier than others when those things come up. Either way, though, it's a good thing. But because we're talking about Aries, Aries is kind of a sign that's all about the self. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It wants to move quickly. It's thinking about, Aries knows how to consider their own needs, right? Aries knows how to speak up for themselves. So I think this is an interesting combination. I think in some ways it's about us working on our relationship with ourselves, especially depending on where this is falling in your chart. But it's also about, during this particular Venus retrograde, us getting in touch with our own unique voice, our own unique desires, our own unique preferences, aesthetics, values, and voicing them. Opinions, needs, all that. Yes, that too. And so it's kind of an interesting Venus retrograde because it's all about relationships, but at the same time, it's all about the self, right? And there are a million other things I could say about this because there's just a lot going on in Aries right now. The nodes also just were in this house and sign. But let's get into specifically this Mercury entering the scene information because I've sort of pulled up 5 keys for harnessing this energy. And I think that that's worth talking about. So I sort of see it this way. I sort of see Aries as a house. There's a house and it's owned by Aries, and Venus is there visiting right now, and Venus is retrograde. So Venus has put on her pajamas. She has pulled up a blanket to the couch. She is really nestled in this Aries house to stay for a while. And then in walks Mercury, Mercury direct. And Mercury direct is a very different energy, right? So it sort of is going to give voice to what's happening with Venus retrograde. I think this is an internal, relational, feeling process, but with Mercury there, we might want to talk about it. Or it might become a little bit more cerebral. You might feel real ideas sort of coming to the surface. You might want to write about it or journal about it. That would actually be a great use of the energy to do that instead of talking about it, because I think we're in a process here. But Mercury comes in and sort of gives us a little bit of a cerebral edge to this, and also just a little bit of sort of a microphone to talk about what's going on. So let's start to move through the 5 tips. I put them together sort of in this little video, which I can advance. Okay, so my first tip for Mercury and Venus in Aries with Venus retrograde is that this is an excellent time to speak your truth, speak what you know, your own unique voice, your own ideas, but do pause first. We need to go a little bit slowly right now. All retrogrades can be associated with misunderstandings or having to redo things. And with all of this energy in Aries, I think that's extra true this time around. Because Aries, like I said, is that first sign of the zodiac. It wants to move forward fast. But with Venus retrograde and Mercury in shadow going to go retrograde in a couple of weeks, there's also this energy sort of moving in the other direction. So it can kind of feel like the brakes and the gas at the same time. And this is how misunderstandings happen. Because when you go to explain something, you might miss a really key part of the explanation. You might skip over a detail that is a really important detail, and others might do this as well. So just remember to slow down. And also, make sure it's what you want to say in the first place. The pause first. We can be a little impulsive and a little bold with all this energy in Aries. So I think finding that pause button also helps us just to be present, right? I think running around right now on total autopilot could lead to some impulsive actions that would move things in the wrong direction. I think a better approach with this Mercury and Venus, both in Aries, is to stay mindful, stay present, so that when you think about saying something, you don't just say it, you think about saying it before you say it. Have that little pause button so that you're only communicating what you really want to and you're going nice and slow. But I do think that there's something to be said for speaking our truth right now. We have all this Aries energy going on for a reason. And it is very important to be your own unique self in this world. And so we don't want to go internal, go inward so much that we aren't ourselves. So I do think that it's very important to be your own unique, beautiful self and let that out into the world. Just have that pause button. around it is my first tip. Let's advance to the second one here. Might take a second for it to come up. Okay. This is a wonderful time not to really execute bold plans, but to formulate them. There are things that you are aiming for. There are directions that you want to go. Now is a time where the actual ideas around how to get there might be coming together. So it's a wonderful time to be working on formulating those ideas and allow them to be bold. Allow them to be big and unconventional or unique to you, something other people wouldn't understand. We're not in a place right now where we really care that much what other people think. Aries isn't really into that very much. And even Venus retrograde, it's like our own unique selves are really able to come to the surface right now. So, and we have this bold energy and we have so much planning potential with Mercury and Venus and Aries. So it's a great time to be putting together your plans and your ideas, not moving on them, not acting on them right now, but just sort of allowing them to come together. Okay, moving forward to tip number 3. I wonder how all of this is feeling for all of you too. I would love to hear in the chat, how has Venus retrograde been going so far? How are you feeling with Mars being direct now? I feel like we have a little bit more energy. Okay, back to the top 5 tips. So this is maybe tip number 1. Maybe my number 1 tip for this time is to revisit past challenges with fresh perspective. And I don't really mean rethink past challenges with fresh perspective. I mean revisit them. So you know what you know now. So if and when a memory from the past comes up during this time, and they do for, I think, all of us, or at least most of us, that you're sort of going through your day and maybe you remember something from the past that happened that was a little difficult, or I don't know, you worry about the way something's going in the present, and whatever comes up to your mind when it concerns a challenge, sort of applying the maturity and the wisdom and the insights that you have now back toward that time can be really helpful. Just sending your current self back, rather than reliving it, revisiting it from the hurt perspective, give it some of the perspective of now. So you might be able to think about what you really learned from that. It's amazing how sometimes difficult situations can provide us with the information that we need to understand the opposite and what we don't want. So sometimes someone acting in a really selfish way helps us realize how silly it is to be selfish, and how we're not going to be that way. And we're so grateful we learned that lesson, and we can shine some compassion toward them because there was a time when we didn't know it either. So rather than kind of reliving the memory from that hurt place, how can you take some of the lessons you've learned since it happened and shine some love back there to yourself first and foremost, and maybe to the other as well, if that comes easily enough for you. But an amazing time to heal and to bring those fresh perspectives to the past relationships. With Venus retrograde, past relationships are coming up anyway. And there's a clarity that Mercury and Aries is providing that I think is really nice. So I think it's a great time to put those 2 things together. Okay, the 4th out of 5 tips. Yes, and I think this one is kind of important. Brace for unfiltered opinions. It is a lot of interesting Aries energy. And I think especially once Mercury goes retrograde on the 15th, but even leading up to it, like we were talking about having that pause button and speaking your truth, but pausing first. Some people might be speaking their truth and not pausing first. Some people might be speaking not really their truth, an exaggerated truth, and not pausing first. So I think just knowing that might be happening is sort of helpful. It's a good time to temper your own responses and just kind of know that there is a lot of that impulsive, reactive, verbal energy in the world right now. So again, the going slow is my best tip. Okay. And the final tip is to take the lead, but listen to. Leadership, good leadership is about knowing where everyone is who's following you. Good leadership isn't about impressing other people and letting them know how amazing you are. Aries energy can sometimes be like that. Um, and we all have a lot of Aries energy right now with so much happening in that part of the sky. Good leadership is about humility and about paying attention to where everyone is who's walking with you and who has allowed you to lead them. And it's about kindness and it's about care. And so Aries loves to lead, and this is an amazing time to lead, to take initiative, to have a tough conversation, maybe even with someone that you've been meaning to have, to advocate for yourself, maybe at work, to ask for more money potentially, let's say, just as an example. But you want to listen too. So you're taking that initiative to advocate for yourself and be in that leadership role, but then you have to consider the person that you're talking to, paying attention to what it is that they're saying and what it is that they're not saying, right? Paying attention to the level of consciousness that they seem to be showing you they're bringing to the table here today during this conversation at hand. Paying attention to what you've known about them before and really listening and being discerning about how you bring yourself to the table accordingly. So I think there's like a little bit of bracing or a little bit of bearing, bearing. This is a terrible word. Well, there's like a little bit of a barrier that we might want to build during this time between us and the world in the most compassionate way possible. It's like we really, really need to take care of ourselves in order to be slow and be careful with others and be understanding of whatever challenges they might be sort of bringing to the table during this time. So those are my top 5 tips for this. I'm going to attach a video here at the end about things not to do during the Venus retrograde and something else as well. And I just appreciate you I very much appreciate you being here today. And I'll be back again tomorrow. Have a great day. Thank you.